Welcome back to Ravox Analysis, the platform that refuses to dilute reality, that refuses to wrap strategic disaster in the soft language of curated narratives, and that delivers raw, unfiltered operational truth about the wars and power shifts reshaping the global order in real time. Tonight, we stand at a point history will record as the most decisive naval confrontation since the Second World War, a moment when the most powerful carrier strike group ever assembled by the United States Navy was deployed to project dominance into the Persian Gulf and did not return whole. The USS Nimitz CVN-68, the lead vessel of its class, has carried the banner of American naval supremacy across every ocean on Earth for nearly 50 years, a symbol of the belief that American force is untouchable, unreachable, and ultimately unstoppable, was hit, shattered, and driven beneath the waters of the Persian Gulf near the Strait of Hormuz. The strike package responsible was not improvised. It was not accidental. It was the calculated release of 2,000 Chinese-origin YJ-91 anti-radiation and anti-ship missiles, positioned, synchronized, and executed with a level of precision that exposed every weakness in the defensive shield surrounding one of America's most valued military assets. Let that number sink in for a moment. 2,000 missiles, a single coordinated barrage on a scale never witnessed in naval warfare since the rise of guided munitions. A flood of incoming threats so overwhelming that the combined defenses of the entire carrier strike group, its Aegis destroyers, its cruisers, its electronic warfare suites, its interceptor reserves, were mathematically incapable of addressing even a portion of the engagement before the attack entered its final phase. The Nimitz is gone, and with it something far greater has vanished, something no shipyard can rebuild, no defense budget can restore, no presidential speech can recover. The assumption that American carrier aviation is an uncontested tool of strategic dominance, the core doctrine underpinning Washington's Middle East strategy for 70 years, has been erased as completely as the vessel that once embodied it. In Washington, the silence from leadership is not calm, it is shock. The kind of institutional paralysis that takes hold when a central belief collapses faster than the systems designed to interpret it can respond. The Joint Chiefs remain in constant session. Intelligence agencies are conducting the kind of urgent internal reckoning that follows a catastrophic failure of foresight. The political system has already begun its search for blame, for accountability, for a response that might restore credibility lost to the depths of the Persian Gulf with the Nimitz. There is no such response available, not now, possibly not ever in the form American strategy once assumed possible. The world is different. The Strait of Hormuz is different. The entire equation of American power projection in the most energy-critical waterway on Earth has been permanently altered. How did 20 YJ-91 missiles end up in Iranian control? What specific capabilities transformed this system into the weapon that shattered American naval dominance in the Gulf? How does Washington react to a disaster of this scale without igniting a global economic collapse through escalation? And what does a world without American control over Hormuz truly mean for nations whose economies depend on the energy passing through it? This analysis will confront those questions with the depth and clarity this historic turning point demands. Before we continue, if this is where you come for analysis that cuts through controlled narratives and delivers strategic reality as it exists, make sure to like, subscribe, and share your perspective in the comments. What does the fall of the Nimitz mean for America's global influence? Every viewpoint matters. Part 1. The engagement, how 2,000 missiles closed an era. To grasp what unfolded in the waters near Hormuz, you must first understand the operational environment into which the Nimitz strike group entered, and how thoroughly that environment had been shaped without full American awareness for precisely this type of confrontation. The USS Nimitz carrier strike group moved into the Persian Gulf approaches as part of what the Pentagon described as a freedom of navigation and deterrence mission, a display of American resolve in response to rising Iranian activity across the wider region. The strike group's structure was formidable by any traditional standard. The Nimitz herself carried roughly 60 fixed-wing aircraft alongside a full suite of defensive systems, escorted by 2 Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruisers, 3 Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers, 2 attack submarines positioned in screening roles, and a support vessel sustaining the group's operational reach. The Aegis combat system distributed across those cruisers and destroyers represents the most advanced ship-based air defense network ever fielded. Each Aegis vessel carries the AN/SPY-1 phased array radar, capable of tracking hundreds of targets simultaneously across multiple axes of threat. Integrated with the standard missile interceptor family, it provides layered defense from long-range engagement down to close-in terminal protection. On paper, the strike group's defensive perimeter could manage a large-scale missile attack, attack. On paper, the reality it encountered had been engineered specifically to overwhelm those exact limits. Iran, working with Chinese technical support and building on decades of study into American naval doctrine, constructed an engagement framework defined not by the complexity of any single component, but by the sheer volume of simultaneous force it could unleash. The YJ-91 missile, known as the Eagle Strike 91, a Chinese-developed anti-radiation and anti-ship system derived from the Russian KH-31 lineage and significantly advanced through domestic innovation, was selected as the primary weapon for reasons rooted in a deep understanding of American defensive vulnerabilities. The YJ-91 operates in two modes: anti-radiation, targeting the electromagnetic emissions of radar systems, and anti-ship, using active radar guidance in its final approach. Against a carrier strike group whose defenses rely entirely on continuous radar operation for detection and targeting, this creates a deadly contradiction. The act of defending becomes the signal that guides the attack. Iran distributed its YJ-91 arsenal across a launch network built over years of preparation. Hardened coastal batteries along the Iranian shoreline formed the long-range backbone of the strike zone. Mobile launch units, truck-mounted containerized systems, were dispersed across terrain that had been carefully mapped, pre-calibrated, and loaded with targeting data for precise coordinates in the Hormuz corridor. Fast patrol vessels operating on the surface added close-range strike capability, and in the most critical operational element of the entire engagement system, subsurface launch platforms, submarine-based variants, and seabed-mounted canister systems hidden within the shallow Gulf approaches introduced a strike vector the group's sensors were never fully optimized to detect or follow. The operation began with a deception phase that revealed the depth of Iranian tactical planning. Small-scale provocations, fast attack craft maneuvers, low-altitude drone intrusions, intermittent radar pings from coastal arrays were used to trigger the strike group's defenses and begin mapping its response behavior. Iranian intelligence networks, reinforced by Chinese signals intelligence support, constructed a live operational picture of the group's defensive posture, radar frequencies, interceptor deployment rhythms, and the spatial limits of its protective coverage. When the main assault unfolded, it did so with a simultaneity the command structure had no model to interpret. The 2,000 missiles did not arrive in waves. They struck as one compressed surge, timed to the narrowest intervals allowed by launcher cycles, forming a wall of incoming tracks that overwhelmed Aegis displays, not as a sequence of threats, but as total sensor saturation. The mathematics of the battle allowed no margin for survival. Each Aegis platform carried a limited interceptor inventory against a threat volume of this magnitude. The calculations led to a conclusion no tactical skill could reverse. The systems worked as intended. The crews acted with precision. Interceptors launched, close-in defense guns roared, electronic warfare suites flooded the spectrum with jamming signals, yet through the gap between defensive capacity and incoming mass, hundreds of missiles broke through into their terminal phase. The Nimitz absorbed multiple near-simultaneous impacts. The exact chain of strikes, the cascading damage, the flooding sequences, the loss of propulsion, and eventual structural failure, those details will remain sealed for years. What is not hidden is the result. The vessel that embodied 5 decades of American naval projection descended beneath the Persian Gulf, and with it sank the era it represented. The human toll, the sailors, the pilots, the thousands who formed the living system of that ship cannot be reduced to strategic language. These were lives, and their loss stands as a tragedy beyond analysis. But the strategic consequences extend far beyond that human cost. They reach into the core framework of American global power in ways only now beginning to emerge. Part 2, the weapon that ended an era, China's YJ-91 and the transfer that reshaped history. The deployment of 2,000 Chinese YJ-91 missiles in Iranian hands was not an accident nor a lapse in monitoring. It is the visible outcome of a strategic alignment between China and Iran built over years of deliberate cooperation, an alignment consistently underestimated in Western threat assessments. To understand why the YJ-91 proved decisive, begin with its design. It is a supersonic weapon capable of terminal speeds that compress defensive reaction time to seconds, not minutes. Its dual-mode seeker, switching between anti-radiation targeting and active radar homing, renders single-mode countermeasures ineffective. A defense that reduces radar output to evade one mode simultaneously blinds itself against the other. The missile does not simply overpower defenses, it forces them into contradiction. Within the confined operational ranges of the Persian Gulf, that contradiction becomes lethal. The YJ-91's flight behavior merges sea-skimming terminal approach, hugging the surface to evade detection with velocities that shrink interception windows to near zero. Against a single missile, a trained Aegis crew with full capacity can achieve a high kill probability. Against 2,000 missiles converging from multiple directions and altitudes, the outcome shifts entirely. China's decision to supply this capability at such scale and timing reflects a broader strategic calculation shaped over years of observing American military patterns. Beijing's primary concern lies in American force projection in a potential Taiwan scenario, where carrier strike groups are the centerpiece. Demonstrating that such groups can be overwhelmed by coordinated missile saturation validates a doctrine China has long pursued, executed here at Iran's operational risk, not its own. The transfer serves several strategic goals simultaneously. It deepens the Sino-Iranian partnership, securing China's energy interests, expanding its regional leverage, and enabling Iran to pressure American positions in the Middle East, diverting U.S. focus from the Pacific. It provides real-world validation of China's anti-access strategy without exposing Chinese forces directly, and it establishes a precedent: Chinese systems successfully destroying a premier American naval asset. That precedent will ripple through defense planning, alliance structures, and procurement decisions across every region where U.S. carriers serve as deterrent force. The scale, 2,000 missiles, was not arbitrary. It reflects a calculated threshold jointly determined by Iranian and Chinese planners as the minimum required to overwhelm carrier strike group defenses. This was not a standard arms deal. It was a coordinated capability development effort shaped by detailed analysis of American systems and synchronized with broader regional dynamics. The precision of the targeting network enabling a simultaneous salvo of this magnitude further reveals contributions beyond hardware. The fire control systems coordinating launch timing across dozens of dispersed platforms to achieve synchronized impact, and the over-the-horizon targeting data enabling coastal systems to strike a moving carrier group beyond direct visual or radar range. These capabilities demand a level of systems integration Iran alone could not have achieved within the available timeline. Chinese satellite networks supplied targeting data throughout the engagement window. Chinese electronic intelligence feeds gave Iranian command real-time visibility into the strike group's defensive posture and adaptive responses. The operation that destroyed the Nimitz was not solely Iranian. It was executed under Iranian command and carried out by Iranian forces, but enabled by a depth of Chinese technical and intelligence backing that made the outcome achievable. This combined character of the strike carries implications far beyond the immediate crisis. It signals that China is prepared to extend the operational support required for a partner to eliminate American naval assets in a regional conflict, and that this readiness persists despite the risk of U.S. retaliation. Because the deniability built into that support framework grants Beijing the political insulation needed to withstand the consequences without triggering direct confrontation. The YJ-91 has secured its place in military history tonight. But more importantly, it has revealed the operational readiness of a Chinese anti-access doctrine that is yet to be tested in the Pacific, and the willingness of a peer competitor to validate that doctrine through a proxy conflict at America's expense. Part 3: Washington's Abyss. The response that cannot recover what has been lost. The Situation Room in the hours following confirmation of the Nimitz loss reflected a reality no current American official has ever faced. Previous military shocks, the Beirut barracks bombing, the Battle of Mogadishu, even the September 11th attacks, each presented a clear chain of causation and a defined adversary, allowing for a structured response, regardless of later missteps. Tonight offers no such clarity. The immediate military choices are real, but each carries consequences beyond what the current political environment can absorb. A retaliatory strike against Iranian territory, targeting launch sites, command networks, and military infrastructure tied to the attack, is operationally feasible and would inflict significant damage, but it would almost certainly trigger a closure of the Strait of Hormuz, a scenario U.S. planners have long worked to avoid. Iranian denial capabilities already in place, naval mines, remaining coastal missile systems, and an active submarine fleet are sufficient to make passage through the strait dangerously impractical for commercial shipping following an American strike. A closure lasting even 2 weeks would remove nearly 20% of globally traded oil from the market at once. The price shock would be immediate, driving crude levels high enough to transmit inflation across every energy-dependent economy within days. The domestic fallout inside the United States, at fuel pumps, across financial markets, and within congressional districts where energy costs shape elections, would hit faster than any military gain could offset. The option of targeting Chinese assets in response to their enabling role introduces an even greater constraint. Direct confrontation with China carries escalation risks that approach the nuclear threshold. Any conflict between the world's two largest nuclear powers leads to a calculation with only one rational conclusion, regardless of provocation. Washington cannot strike Beijing directly without accepting risks that far exceed the loss it seeks to avenge. Economic responses, sanctions, export restrictions, financial isolation, face another barrier. Both Iran and China have spent years constructing systems specifically designed to endure these measures. Alternative payment networks outside the dollar system, energy trade agreements denominated beyond Western frameworks, and commodity exchange routes that bypass traditional financial structures. None of these were created by chance. They were built in anticipation of exactly this kind of Western retaliation. What remains for Washington in the immediate aftermath is a set of responses that are individually viable but collectively incapable of restoring what was lost when the Nimitz went down. Diplomatic protests will follow. Financial penalties will be imposed, military positions will be adjusted, additional forces will be deployed, operational doctrines will evolve, defensive systems will be reinforced. None of these actions returns a carrier to the Gulf. None of them rebuilds the credibility that sank with it. The political crisis in Washington deepens the strategic one. An administration that has defined itself through projections of strength, through the promise of restored deterrence, through the assertion that American power remains unquestioned, now confronts the most visible naval loss since World War II. The domestic consequences will be intense and prolonged. The international impact will ripple across every region where American military presence substitutes for the stable diplomatic structures a truly balanced global order would require. Allies across the region are now conducting urgent reassessments. The Gulf states, whose entire security framework has rested on the assumption of American naval supremacy in the Persian Gulf, are suddenly operating in a reality where that supremacy has been visibly broken. The discussions unfolding in Riyadh, in Abu Dhabi, and in Doha about diversifying security partnerships, about recalibrating relations with Iran, about questioning the reliability of American guarantees, are already shaping decisions that will steadily weaken Washington's influence in the region over the coming years. The loss of the Nimitz is not an isolated shock. It is the opening event in a chain reaction of strategic consequences whose full scale will take years to unfold, but whose trajectory is already clear to any serious observer. Part 4, the Persian Will, Iran's strategic validation and the force of endurance that made this moment possible. There is a dimension to Iran's achievement in last night's engagement that cannot be measured through weapons counts or tactical analysis. It is something that can only be understood by tracing the long arc of Iran's strategic experience across the decades that led to this point. In that history lies the Iran-Iraq War, a conflict that cost the Islamic Republic between 200,000 and 600,000 military lives, a range that itself reflects the scale of devastation. That war was fought against an Iraq backed simultaneously by Western powers, Gulf Arab states, and the Soviet Union. Iran faced it largely alone, under embargo, with outdated equipment and improvised logistics, against an opponent supported from every direction. It fought to a standstill, enduring losses that would have shattered most nations, and emerged with a lesson permanently embedded in its leadership. External powers cannot be trusted, alliances are temporary. The only lasting security is the one a nation builds itself, through its own industry, its own technology, its own resilience. Every sanction that followed, every targeted killing of Iranian scientists, every act of sabotage against its nuclear and military infrastructure, every threat issued from Washington or Tel Aviv, each reinforced that same conclusion. Invest deeper, disperse further, build internally. The YJ-91 missiles that destroyed the Nimitz were not simply purchased and stored. They were absorbed into an Iranian operational system through years of cooperation, training, and doctrinal refinement that transformed a foreign platform into a domestically controlled capability. The targeting systems, the synchronized launch execution, the electronic warfare coordination, the intelligence fusion that enabled a 2,000 missile strike to function as a single event. These are institutional achievements. built on external technology but shaped, perfected, and executed by Iranian military professionals who have spent decades preparing for this exact moment. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, the branch responsible for anti-ship missile operations and the force behind last night's attack, has been training for a carrier kill scenario since the first American carrier entered the Gulf after the revolution. This doctrine has evolved over 40 years of study, exercises, and incremental capability growth. The commanders who led the operation have spent their entire careers preparing for it. That depth of institutional focus cannot be recreated quickly by an adversary that has not made the same long-term investment. And it cannot be erased by retaliation. The knowledge, the personnel, the doctrine, the conviction that produced the strike are not centralized targets. Iran emerges from this moment with its strategic narrative fully validated. The claim it has made to its people, to its allies, to the wider world, that disciplined, patient, asymmetric investment can overcome overwhelming conventional power has now been demonstrated beyond dispute. The domestic effect of this validation will be profound. The sanctions regime has imposed real economic hardship, but the argument that those sacrifices were necessary, that independence and security justify the cost, has now been confirmed in the most visible way possible. A nation that witnesses its forces sink an American carrier is a nation whose resolve hardens. The endurance that built this capability through decades of pressure, covert attacks, and economic isolation is the same endurance that will sustain Iran's position after this engagement. It is not something military force can easily erode. It is the most durable strategic asset Iran possesses, and last night it revealed what that asset can achieve when fully realized. Part 5. Hormuz Forever Altered. A new order written across the water. The Persian Gulf has served as the central axis of global energy economics for nearly a century. Roughly 21 million barrels of oil moving daily through the Strait of Hormuz form the backbone of the modern industrial system. It fuels Asian manufacturing, heats European cities, and powers the global supply chain. Control over Hormuz, or even the credible threat of disrupting it, is not just a regional military advantage. It is leverage over the global economy itself. For decades, that flow has been secured by American naval dominance. The carrier strike groups stationed in the Persian Gulf, along with the wider American military footprint in the region, once formed a deterrent against Iranian disruption that held weight because it was backed by proven capability. That credibility collapsed with the destruction of the Nimitz, and the consequences now ripple through the entire structure of the global economy and the balance of power that energy flows sustain. In the immediate aftermath, insurance markets responsible for assessing risk on commercial shipping through the Strait of Hormuz are recalibrating to a new reality. War risk premiums, already elevated, have surged to levels that render many voyages financially unsustainable. Shipping firms operating the massive crude carriers that underpin Gulf exports now face a decision: move through a corridor where American protection can no longer be relied upon, or halt entirely. The choices being made in corporate boardrooms in Athens, Tokyo, and Oslo over the next 72 hours may determine whether disruption becomes immediate reality. Before another missile is even launched, oil markets have already reacted. Prices surged upon confirmation of the Nimitz loss, and that upward trajectory reflects a growing consensus that sustained instability in Hormuz is no longer hypothetical. Each incremental rise in oil prices shifts economic strain from importing nations to producing ones, and at the scale now unfolding, that shift becomes a global shock. The geopolitical consequences of prolonged uncertainty in Hormuz extend far beyond price volatility. The Gulf Cooperation Council states, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, and Oman have built their economic systems on the assumption that energy exports can flow freely, shielded from Iranian interference. That assumption has now been exposed as fragile. Conversations unfolding within these capitals about recalibrating toward Iran, diversifying alliances to include China and Russia, and reassessing the reliability of American security guarantees are setting the stage for decisions that will reshape the region and deepen Washington's strategic setback in the Gulf. Russia's position strengthens almost immediately in this altered landscape. Its energy exports, already routed outside Hormuz, gain value in a market where Gulf supply faces uncertainty. The leverage Moscow holds over both European consumers and Asian importers grows in direct proportion to instability in the Gulf. Russia did not act last night. It did not need to. The environment shifted in ways that favor its strategic interests without direct involvement. China's role is more complex. Beijing depends heavily on Gulf energy, and disruption imposes real economic risk. Yet China's relationship with Iran positions it uniquely as both partner and potential stabilizer. The nation capable of influencing Tehran, offering economic backing while also imposing limits on escalation, becomes the central arbiter of Hormuz stability. That role no longer belongs to Washington, it belongs to Beijing. The multipolar world long discussed in academic circles has now taken tangible form. A regional actor equipped with Chinese systems and operating within a broader strategic context shaped in part by Russian positioning has destroyed the naval platform that symbolized American dominance more than any other. The unipolar era, defined by overwhelming U.S. military superiority and the absence of credible challengers, has ended in the waters of the Persian Gulf. What follows is not a simple binary rivalry, nor uncontrolled fragmentation, but a layered and unstable system where multiple powers possess the ability to impose severe costs on one another. In this environment, the rules that govern conflict, deterrence, and power projection must be renegotiated. The structures built for the previous order are no longer sufficient. Iran has not merely won a battle, it has secured something more enduring. The Islamic Republic that emerges from this moment is no longer defined solely by sanctions or isolation. It is a state that has sunk an American carrier, validated a doctrine that challenges the core of U.S. military power, and forced every global actor to reassess the balance of power. The Strait of Hormuz will not revert to its previous framework. The American naval presence that once guaranteed its stability has been shown to be vulnerable against the threat architecture now in place. New arrangements will inevitably take shape, arrangements reflecting the redistribution of power revealed in this engagement. Those frameworks will grant Iran a role in shaping the governance of the world's most critical energy choke point, something no prior U.S. administration was willing to accept. The waters through which nearly a fifth of global oil flows will never be viewed the same again by strategists, policymakers, or markets. The era symbolized by the USS Nimitz ended with its loss. The era replacing it is being defined in real time, through decisions made in Tehran, Beijing, Moscow, across Gulf capitals, and within a Washington only beginning to grasp the scale of what has changed. The fires at sea will eventually fade. Diplomatic processes will emerge to contain escalation. Markets will stabilize, pricing in new risks. Shipping will adapt, as it always does, to the pressures imposed by geopolitics. But the strategic landscape that emerges from those adaptations will not resemble what existed before the Nimitz went down. A foundational premise of the global order that American naval power constitutes an unanswerable guarantee of freedom of navigation through the world's critical waterways has been operationally disproven in the most visible possible way. The actors who have spent decades building the capability to disprove it have been vindicated. The actors who built their security on the assumption of its permanent validity are confronting a reckoning whose depth they are only beginning to measure. History pivots on moments like this, not always the moments that seem largest in the immediate news cycle, but the moments when a foundational assumption collapses and the world must rebuild its strategic logic on new foundations. Tonight is one of those moments. The Nimitz has taken an era with it to the bottom of the Persian Gulf. What rises in its place will be determined by the strategic choices made in the weeks, months, and years ahead by actors whose relative positions have just been permanently and irrevocably altered. What does the loss of American naval dominance in the Gulf mean for the global order you inhabit? And where does this confrontation go from here? Toward a new framework that acknowledges the new reality, or toward an escalation that tests every remaining boundary? Drop your analysis in the comments. Every perspective sharpens the picture. If this breakdown delivered what you cannot find in the managed narrative of mainstream coverage, share it, hit like, and subscribe. The next chapter of this conflict is already being written. Stay sharp, stay informed, and we will see you in the next.